Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Appalachia, West Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The limestone mountains of Appalachia have always kept their secrets well. In 1905, the Whitaker family lived in McDowell County, tucked away in the dense forest of the Blue Ridge Mountains. According to county records, two brothers, Elijah and Samuel Whitaker, were coal miners who vanished under circumstances that officials seemed determined to erase from public memory. What makes this case particularly unsettling isn't just their disappearance, but the methodical way information about them was systematically removed from official records. The Whitaker case first came to light in 1962, when historian Margaret Holcomb was researching coal mining accidents for West Virginia University. While examining microfilms of local newspapers from the early 1900s, she noticed something peculiar. Several articles from the McDowell County Register appeared to have been deliberately cut out. The missing pieces all corresponded to dates in October and November 1905. Further investigation revealed that county death records from that same period contained entries that had been obscured with black ink. What could have been so disturbing that someone wanted it permanently erased? Holcomb's curiosity led her to the small town of Welch, the county seat of McDowell, where she discovered an elderly man named Thomas Garrison, who had worked as a clerk at the county courthouse for over 40 years. According to Holcomb's notes, Garrison was initially reluctant to speak about the Whitaker brothers. "Some things are better left in the dark," he reportedly told her. But after several meetings, he finally shared what he knew. Elijah and Samuel Whitaker had moved to McDowell County around 1899, during the coal mining boom that was transforming Appalachia. They came from somewhere in North Carolina, though no one seemed to know exactly where. The brothers were quiet, kept to themselves, and worked the dangerous night shifts at the Ekman mine about 7 miles north of Welch. They lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, away from the company housing where most miners resided. What made the brothers stand out, according to Garrison's account, was their peculiar appearance. They were identical twins, tall and gaunt, with unusually pale skin that contrasted sharply with the coal dust that perpetually clung to most miners. Their eyes were described as almost colorless, and they spoke with such similar voices that even after years, people couldn't tell them apart. But the most striking detail was their complete lack of social connections. In a close-knit mining community where survival often depended on brotherhood and collective support, the Whitakers remained isolated. The cabin they inhabited sat at the edge of a dense forest, approximately a mile from the nearest neighbor. Built sometime in the 1880s by a previous mining family who had left the area, it was a simple 2-room structure with a stone foundation and rough-hewn timber walls. Locals claimed the place had always had an unwelcoming air. The windows were small and set high in the walls, allowing minimal light to penetrate the interior. Even on bright summer days, the cabin seemed to exist in perpetual twilight. Garrison recalled that in the summer of 1905, things began to change. The brothers started attending town meetings and church services, something they had never done before. They made inquiries about purchasing land deeper in the mountains, and most notably they began keeping company with Dr. Howard Merritt, the mine physician who had recently arrived from Baltimore. Dr. Merritt was himself somewhat of an enigma. Though qualified as a medical doctor, he seemed unusually interested in folk remedies and what he called the mountain people's wisdom. He was known to venture into remote hollows, seeking out elderly residents who still practiced traditional medicine. Some said he was writing a book on the subject. Others whispered that his interest went beyond academic curiosity, that he was looking for something specific. Merritt stood out in the small mining community, tall and slender, with a neatly trimmed beard and wire-rimmed spectacles. He carried himself with the confidence of education and urban refinement. Unlike most professionals who found themselves in the rough Appalachian coal country, he seemed genuinely fascinated by the region and its people. He took extensive notes during his conversations with locals, particularly when they discussed the deeper caverns and underground formations that riddled the mountains. The doctor had established his practice in a small, clapboard building near the company store. The front served as his examination room and dispensary, while he lived in the rooms at the back. Those few who were invited into his private quarters reported walls lined with books on unusual subjects, ancient civilizations, geological anomalies, evolution, and obscure medical texts in multiple languages. One visitor, the local postmaster, recalled seeing strange artifacts displayed on Merritt's shelves, oddly shaped stones with peculiar markings, preserved specimens in jars, and maps covered with annotations in a cramped, meticulous hand. The doctor's association with the Whitaker brothers raised eyebrows. They were often seen in deep conversation on the doctor's porch late into the night. On several occasions they were spotted loading crates into a wagon and heading up into the mountains, returning days later haggard and silent. When asked about these excursions, the doctor would smile tightly and mention scientific specimens. According to records Holcomb uncovered, Dr. Merritt had officially come to McDowell County as part of a public health initiative funded by a Baltimore medical foundation. His assignment was to study and treat the respiratory diseases common among coal miners. But his correspondence with the foundation, preserved in their archives, revealed other interests. In letters dated from early 1905, Merritt repeatedly referenced unusual geological formations and their potential physiological effects on long-term inhabitants. He requested additional funding for specialized equipment, spectroscopes, chemical analysis kits, and photographic apparatus, items seemingly unrelated to treating black lung or mining injuries. More telling was a partially burned letter Holcomb discovered among papers that had survived a 1930s courthouse fire, written by Merritt to someone identified only as Professor L. It contained this cryptic passage: "The local formations match your theories perfectly. The limestone here is of the exact composition you predicted and at the depths you specified. More importantly, I have located two individuals who appear to be exhibiting the preliminary physiological responses. They are brothers, with the family characteristic prominently displayed. If your hypothesis is correct, they represent the third generation at minimum. I have made contact and gained their trust. We begin the deeper explorations next month." In late September 1905, according to Garrison, Dr. Merritt abruptly announced that he had been called back to Baltimore for family matters. He promised to return within a month. The Whitaker brothers continued working at the mine, but their behavior reportedly became increasingly erratic. They worked alternate shifts so that one was always at their cabin. They installed heavy locks on their doors and windows, and, according to at least one account preserved in Holcomb's notes, they began carrying revolvers even down into the mine, a dangerous and prohibited practice. The period between Merritt's departure and the brothers' disappearance was marked by other strange occurrences in the area. Miners reported unusual echoes in certain sections of the Ekman mine, as if the tunnels connected to much larger hollow spaces. A hunting party returned from the mountains near Blackthorn Ridge with stories of ground that felt wrong under their feet, reverberating like a drum when they walked across certain areas. Most disturbing were reports of unusual sounds coming from the direction of the Whitaker cabin at night, a low pulsing hum that made livestock restless and caused dogs to howl. On October 12, 1905, the postmaster noticed that the brothers' mail was piling up. Neither had been seen for at least 3 days. The mine foreman confirmed they had missed their shifts without notice. Sheriff James Buchanan assembled a small group to check on the Whitakers, concerned they might have fallen ill. What they found at the cabin was described only vaguely in the fragments of records that survived. The sheriff's official report mentioned signs of disturbance and evidence of hasty departure. But Garrison, who had seen the original report before it was altered, told Holcomb that the cabin's interior had been completely transformed. The walls were covered with strange drawings and symbols. Hundreds of pages of notes were scattered about, many in a language or code no one recognized. Most disturbing were the extensive anatomical diagrams pinned to the walls, detailed sketches of human musculature and bone structure labeled with unfamiliar terms. The furniture had been pushed against the walls to make room for a large table in the center of the main room. The table was covered with scientific equipment, microscopes, glass vials containing unidentified substances, measuring devices of unusual design, and what appeared to be electrical apparatus connected to batteries. Beneath the table was a trapdoor that had not been a part of the original cabin construction. It opened onto a narrow shaft descending into darkness, with crude ladder rungs hammered into the rock. Sheriff Buchanan ordered 2 of his deputies to explore the shaft. They descended about 30 feet before returning, visibly shaken. They reported finding a small chamber carved from the limestone, illuminated by oil lamps that were still burning. The chamber contained more scientific equipment and several large glass containers filled with a cloudy liquid. Floating in these containers were what the deputies described as specimens, organic materials they couldn't identify. On a stone shelf lay a journal open to a page with an entry dated October 9th. The writing was in English but contained many technical terms and abbreviations that made little sense to the lawman. There was no sign of the brothers themselves. A search party was organized, and for 3 days men combed the surrounding mountains. On the 3rd day, they discovered an abandoned mine shaft about 4 miles from town in an area known locally as Blackthorn Ridge. The entrance had recently been widened, and fresh tool marks suggested extensive work had been done to reinforce the tunnel. Blackthorn Ridge had a dark reputation even before the Whitaker incident. Local folklore told of Native American tribes who had avoided the area, believing it to be a place where the boundary between worlds was thin. Early settlers reported unusual phenomena: compasses that spun wildly, livestock that refused to graze there, strange lights seen dancing across the ridge at night. Geological surveys from the 1880s noted the unusual density of cave systems beneath the ridge and the peculiar composition of the limestone, which contained trace minerals rarely found in Appalachian formations. Sheriff Buchanan led a group of 5 men into the shaft. According to Garrison, only 4 returned. What happened inside remains unclear. The sheriff emerged visibly shaken and immediately sent a telegraph to state authorities. Within 24 hours, officials from Charleston arrived and took control of the site. The area was cordoned off, and locals were warned to stay away under threat of arrest. The missing man was Deputy William Hayes, a lifelong resident of McDowell County and an experienced miner before joining the sheriff's department. His body was never recovered. The official explanation was that he had fallen into a deep crevice, and retrieval was deemed too dangerous. His widow reportedly received a substantial payment from the state government, an unusual occurrence that raised eyebrows but generated no official investigation. For nearly 2 weeks, government men worked at the site. Heavy equipment was brought in. At night, locals reported hearing strange mechanical sounds echoing from the ridge, and then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the officials departed. The mine entrance was blasted closed, buried under tons of rock. No explanation was given. In the following months, a peculiar quiet descended on McDowell County. The Whitaker brothers were never mentioned in public. Dr. Merritt never returned from Baltimore. Indeed, inquiries made to medical institutions there found no record of a doctor by that name ever having practiced in the city. Most strange of all, county officials began systematically removing all documentation relating to the Whitakers and the events on Blackthorn Ridge. Garrison told Holcomb that he had personally been instructed to alter records, removing death certificates, property deeds, and employment records. Newspaper archives were purged. Even church registers had pages removed. It was as if someone had decided the Whitaker brothers had never existed at all. The most troubling aspect of Garrison's account concerned Sheriff Buchanan. The man who entered that mine shaft emerged fundamentally changed. Once sociable and even-tempered, he became withdrawn and prone to sudden rages. He resigned his position before the year was out and moved to his sister's home in Kentucky. According to correspondence Holcomb uncovered, Buchanan suffered from terrible insomnia and would awaken screaming about what they were building down there and the chambers beneath. Garrison claimed that on his deathbed in 1913, Buchanan had a moment of lucidity and called for a priest. What he confessed remains unknown, but the priest reportedly left the house white-faced and trembling. He requested an immediate transfer to another parish and refused to discuss what he had heard. What makes the Whitaker case so compelling is not just the brothers' disappearance, but the coordinated effort to erase their existence from the historical record. Such systematic removal suggests something far beyond the ordinary cover-up of a mining accident or local scandal. It points to knowledge or discoveries that authorities deemed too disturbing for public awareness. Following her meetings with Garrison, Margaret Holcomb intensified her research. She traveled to surrounding counties, searching for any references to the Whitakers or Dr. Merritt. In Tazewell County, Virginia, just across the state line, she found a single newspaper clipping from August 1905 that mentioned the unusual experiments of Dr. Merritt and Associates and questioned whether they constituted an appropriate use of company medical resources. The article, written by a local physician who appeared concerned about Merritt's methods, alluded to treatments of questionable medical value and the harvesting of cave specimens for purposes unclear. Most interestingly, it referenced complaints from miners about being asked to collect mineral samples from specific depths and to report any unusual formations or chambers they encountered in their work. The writer seemed particularly troubled by rumors that Merritt was conducting experiments involving the effects of subterranean conditions on human physiology. More significantly, Holcomb discovered in the archives of the West Virginia Department of Mines a sealed file labeled simply Blackthorn Incident Classified. When she requested access, she was firmly denied. Her subsequent Freedom of Information request was also rejected, citing matters of public health and safety. Undeterred, Holcomb began interviewing elderly residents of McDowell County, hoping to find someone who remembered the Whitakers firsthand. Most claimed no knowledge, though she noted in her journal that many seemed uncomfortable with the questions, changing the subject or suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. Eventually, she located Abner Lewis, a retired miner in his 80s who had worked the same shift as Elijah Whitaker. Lewis lived in a small house on the outskirts of Welch, its wooden porch sagging with age, the white paint long since weathered to a dull gray. He was initially hesitant, peering at Holcomb through the crack of a barely opened door. Only after she mentioned Thomas Garrison's name did he reluctantly invite her inside. The interior was dim, all the curtains drawn despite the bright spring day. Lewis explained that his eyes had become sensitive to light in his old age, a condition he attributed to decades spent in the mines. Lewis was initially hesitant, but eventually shared what he knew. The Whitaker brothers, he said, were not actually identical twins, as most people assumed. They were simply brothers who looked remarkably similar due to what Lewis called the family condition. According to Lewis, the brothers had confided in him that the entire Whitaker family shared certain physical traits: extreme pallor, sensitivity to sunlight, and unusual eye coloration. These characteristics had led to persecution in their previous home, which is why they had relocated to the more isolated region of southern West Virginia. Lewis described the brothers as intelligent and well-spoken, with an education that seemed at odds with their chosen occupation. They used technical vocabulary and often discussed scientific concepts that went over the heads of their fellow miners. They showed particular interest in the limestone formations encountered deep in the mine, often collecting samples and making detailed notes about the locations where they were found. More intriguing was Lewis's claim about the brothers' activities. They were not merely coal miners, but educated men with scientific backgrounds. They had taken the mining jobs as cover while they conducted some form of research in the mountains. Lewis recalled Elijah once mentioning that they were looking for something left behind, something very old, in the deeper limestone caves that honeycomb the Appalachian region. The brothers had shown Lewis a journal filled with drawings of unusual rock formations and what appeared to be maps of cave systems. They explained that certain rare combinations of minerals, when found in specific geological contexts, could have remarkable properties. When Lewis asked what kind of properties, they grew evasive, saying only that it related to adaptation and evolution. Lewis had the impression they were searching for something specific, guided by a theory or information they were reluctant to share fully. Lewis also provided a disturbing detail about Dr. Merritt's involvement. According to him, the doctor had approached the brothers after learning of their family background. Merritt had shown them something, a document or artifact, that had greatly excited them. After that meeting, the three became inseparable, and the brothers' nighttime expeditions into the mountains increased. One evening in late August 1905, Lewis had encountered the three men loading equipment into a wagon behind Merritt's office. The doctor was arguing with Samuel Whitaker, insisting that they needed to accelerate the timetable. When they noticed Lewis, they fell silent immediately. Merritt invited Lewis to join them for a drink, an unusual gesture that seemed designed to determine whether he had overheard anything significant. During the awkward conversation that followed, Merritt casually inquired about Lewis's family background, asking whether his ancestors had lived in the region for generations and if they had ever experienced unusual physical reactions to the local environment. The most unsettling part of Lewis's account concerned the days just before the brothers vanished. He claimed to have encountered Samuel Whitaker outside the company store, looking gaunt and feverish despite the autumn chill. When Lewis expressed concern, Samuel grabbed his arm with surprising strength and said something that had troubled Lewis for decades. "We found it, Abner. God help us. We found it. But it's not what we thought. It's older, much older. And it's not dead, just waiting." When Lewis asked what he meant, Samuel seemed to catch himself. He released Lewis's arm and forced a smile, claiming he was simply overtired from working too many shifts. He promised to explain everything when the time was right. That was the last conversation Lewis ever had with either brother. Lewis also revealed something he had never told the authorities. The night before the brothers disappeared, he had been walking home from his shift and took a shortcut past their cabin. The hour was late, well past midnight, but light still glowed from the windows. As he passed, he heard voices raised in what sounded like an argument. He recognized the Whitakers' distinctive speech patterns, but there was a third voice he didn't know. Not Dr. Merritt's cultivated tones, but something rougher, with an accent Lewis couldn't place. Most disturbing was the content of the overheard exchange. Someone, Lewis believed it was Elijah, said clearly, "It's changing too fast. We can't control it." The unknown voice responded with what sounded like, "Control was never the objective. Adaptation is the only path forward." Lewis admitted to Holcomb that he had been too frightened to investigate further and had hurried home. When news of the brothers' disappearance spread days later, he considered telling Sheriff Buchanan about what he'd heard, but decided against it. Something about the entire situation had struck him as dangerous to be associated with. That caution had only grown stronger over the decades, and even now, speaking to Holcomb in the privacy of his home, he frequently glanced at the windows, as if expecting to see someone listening. Before Holcomb left, Lewis made a final cryptic comment. He mentioned that in the years following the Whitaker incident, several miners reported seeing figures moving deep in abandoned sections of the Ekman mine, tall, pale figures that avoided the light and vanished when approached. The company dismissed these sightings as imagination or practical jokes, but Lewis wasn't convinced. "There are deeper places under these mountains than anyone knows," he told Holcomb, "and I think the Whitakers found something down there that changed them so much they couldn't come back up into the light." Margaret Holcomb's investigation took an unexpected turn in early 1964. While researching at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., she discovered a series of geological surveys of McDowell County conducted in 1906, just months after the Whitaker incident. The surveys focused extensively on Blackthorn Ridge, with particular attention to subsurface anomalies and unusual limestone formations. More telling was a restricted addendum to the survey that mentioned the need for containment measures and ongoing monitoring of the site. The surveys had been commissioned not by the U.S. Geological Survey, as would be expected, but by a department of the federal government identified only as Special Scientific Research Division. Holcomb could find no other references to this division in any public records. A separate document filed with the survey, but apparently missed during the classification process, contained a brief report from someone with the title Medical Observer. It referenced anomalous biological specimens recovered from the site and recommended indefinite quarantine procedures. Holcomb also uncovered evidence that in the years following 1905, at least 7 other individuals had gone missing in the vicinity of Blackthorn Ridge. In each case, investigations were perfunctory, and records were subsequently difficult to locate. The disappearances stopped after 1911, when the entire area was purchased by a mining company that immediately fenced off the property and posted armed guards, ostensibly to protect valuable mineral deposits. The mining company, Blackthorn Extraction Limited, appeared to have been created specifically for this purchase. It conducted no actual mining operations, filed no production reports, and employed only security personnel. Its corporate registration listed a board of directors whose names also appeared on government payrolls. Holcomb noted in her journal, "This is not a mining operation. It's a containment operation disguised as commercial activity." Perhaps most significant was Holcomb's discovery of a medical file in the archives of Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. The file, dated December 1905, documented the case of a John Doe patient admitted with unusual symptoms: extreme photosensitivity, enhanced night vision, abnormal blood chemistry, and skeletal modifications described as adaptive responses to subterranean environment. The attending physician noted that the patient claimed to be evolving and made disturbing predictions about the future of human development. The file ended abruptly with a notation that the patient had been transferred to a government facility. A letter attached to the file, written on Department of War letterhead, instructed hospital staff to destroy all records of the case and forget the patient had ever existed. By mid-1964, Holcomb had compiled substantial documentation on the Whitaker case and was preparing a monograph for academic publication. Her journals indicate she had developed a theory about what the brothers had discovered in the mountains, something relating to the unusual limestone cave systems, and possibly connected to what she cryptically referred to as pre-colonial inhabitants. We know this because in August 1964, Holcomb sent a draft of her work to a colleague at University of Pennsylvania with a note expressing concerns about unusual attention from individuals she believed were government agents. She mentioned phone calls where nothing was said and a man in a dark suit who had been watching her apartment. The note, preserved in her colleague's personal papers and discovered decades later, contained this passage: "What the Whitakers found goes beyond conventional science. The limestone in those mountains contains trace elements not found anywhere else on Earth. Prolonged exposure appears to trigger physiological changes, adaptations that might be beneficial in certain environments, but render individuals increasingly unsuited for normal human society. I believe the brothers were already experiencing these changes due to their family's long habitation in the region." Merritt recognized the signs and recruited them for his research. What they ultimately discovered in the deeper caves was evidence that this process had occurred before, perhaps centuries earlier, creating a population of individuals who had fully adapted to subterranean existence. The government's containment operation isn't about hiding a scientific discovery. It's about hiding an entire subspecies of humanity. The colleague never received the package. Postal records show it was delivered, but the recipient claimed it never arrived. 2 weeks later, Holcomb's apartment in Morgantown suffered a devastating fire. The official cause was listed as an electrical fault. Margaret Holcomb was not among the victims because she wasn't there. According to neighbors, she had hastily departed the day before, carrying a large suitcase. She left no forwarding address. All of Holcomb's research materials were presumably destroyed in the fire. Her academic position was filled by another historian who had no interest in Appalachian mining history. The Whitaker case was once again consigned to oblivion, or it would have been, except for one crucial detail. Thomas Garrison, the elderly court clerk who had first spoken to Holcomb, had kept his own records. In 1957, years before meeting Holcomb, Garrison had become concerned about his fading memory and began writing down everything he could recall about the unusual cases he had encountered during his career. These journals remained with his family after his death in 1965. In 1968, Garrison's grandson, Michael, was cleaning out his grandfather's belongings when he discovered the journals hidden in a false bottom of an old desk. Recognizing their potential historical value, Michael contacted West Virginia University's History Department. By coincidence, his inquiry was directed to Professor Alan Nesmith, who had been a friend and colleague of Margaret Holcomb. Nesmith immediately recognized the significance of the journals. They contained not only Garrison's recollections of the Whitaker case, but also transcribed copies of several original documents that had since been destroyed or hidden. Most importantly, they included a hand-drawn map showing the location of the Blackthorn Ridge mine shaft and several other sites that the Whitaker brothers had apparently visited. Among the transcribed documents was a letter from Dr. Merritt to someone identified as Dr. L. at Johns Hopkins. Dated September 15, 1905, it described remarkable progress in their research. Merritt wrote, "The Whitaker specimens confirm all our theories. The cellular adaptation is accelerating in response to increased exposure. S is showing advanced characteristics already, including enhanced visual acuity in low light and significant musculoskeletal modifications. E is progressing more slowly, but shows similar tendencies. Most importantly, they have located what appears to be an entrance to the deeper system we postulated. Initial exploration suggests it extends far beyond our original estimates, with evidence of previous habitation. We have recovered artifacts of unclear origin and age, including tools adapted for use in complete darkness. I depart tomorrow for Baltimore to secure additional equipment, but the brothers will continue preliminary mapping of the system. Upon my return, we will venture into the primary chambers they have identified." Another document, even more disturbing, was a partial transcript of Sheriff Buchanan's interview with Deputy Hayes the day after their exploration of the mine shaft. Hayes described finding a large chamber about 200 feet below the surface, illuminated by lanterns left by the Whitakers. The chamber contained scientific equipment similar to that found in the cabin, but more extensive. Papers and journals were scattered across a makeshift table, alongside rock and mineral samples, labeled with dates and locations. But what had truly disturbed the deputy was finding what he described as a surgery or operating area containing restraints and medical instruments. Hayes reported that the stone floor in this area was stained with what appeared to be blood, and nearby they discovered clothing identified as belonging to the Whitaker brothers, torn and similarly stained. Most alarming was Hayes's description of discovering a tunnel leading deeper from the main chamber. When they approached it, they felt a cold air current flowing from below and heard what Hayes described as breathing sounds, but not like any human or animal I know. Sheriff Buchanan ordered them to withdraw at that point, but Hayes claimed that as they turned to leave, he saw movement in the darkness of the tunnel. Something tall and pale, moving faster than a man should be able to move. The transcript ended with Hayes insisting they return with more men and better weapons. The notation Deputy Hayes missing, presumed dead, following second exploration, was added in Garrison's handwriting. Intrigued, Nesmith decided to follow up on the investigation that had seemingly cost Holcomb her career. He proceeded more cautiously, however. Rather than announcing his research publicly, he conducted it under the guise of a broader study of mining technology in Appalachia. He visited McDowell County several times between 1968 and 1969, using Garrison's map to locate the key sites. Blackthorn Ridge had changed considerably since 1905. The mining company that had purchased the land was now defunct, and the area had reverted to state ownership. The fence was gone, though Nesmith noted in his field journal that there were still signs warning against trespassing due to unstable ground conditions. More interesting was the presence of what appeared to be monitoring equipment, disguised as ordinary utility boxes, but with small satellite antennas placed at regular intervals around the ridge. The mine shaft entrance was no longer visible, buried under decades of rockfall and vegetation. But using Garrison's map, Nesmith located something potentially more significant, a small cave entrance on the eastern face of the ridge that Garrison had marked as W Laboratory. The entrance was narrow, barely large enough for an adult to squeeze through. Nesmith came prepared with caving equipment and ventured inside. What he found, according to the single journal entry he made afterward, was a chamber that had clearly been enlarged and modified for human use. Stone shelves had been carved into the walls. Metal hooks, now rusted, had been driven into the ceiling, perhaps for hanging lamps. And on the far wall, partially obscured by decades of mineral deposits, were inscriptions, a combination of mathematical formulas, diagrams, and text in what Nesmith described as "no language I recognize." The most striking feature of the chamber was a stone table in the center, smooth and slightly concave, with channels cut into its surface leading to a collection basin at one end. The basin contained a residue that, when Nesmith examined it with a portable microscope, appeared to consist of crystalline structures unlike any mineral he was familiar with. Near the table stood a metal cabinet, rusted but still intact. Inside, Nesmith found glass vials containing dried specimens and handwritten labels identifying them as tissue samples, with dates from September and October 1905. Nesmith took numerous photographs and made rubbings of the inscriptions. He collected samples of a peculiar residue found in several clay pots that remained intact on the shelves. Most notably, he discovered a metal box wedged into a crevice, apparently hidden intentionally. The box contained papers, badly damaged by moisture, but still partially legible. The papers appeared to be notes written by one of the Whitaker brothers. They detailed experiments involving local mineral samples and something referred to only as the substrate. There were references to remarkable properties of cellular regeneration and structural modifications at the molecular level. One page contained what looked like a medical diary, tracking changes in someone's physical condition over several weeks, noting increasing sensitivity to light, altered sleep patterns, and extraordinary auditory acuity. The diary entries became increasingly erratic toward the end, with the handwriting deteriorating and the language shifting between technical terminology and almost poetic descriptions of the voices from below and the pull of the deeper chambers. Several passages described dreams or visions of vast underground spaces and those who came before, who showed us the way down. The writer expressed both fear and fascination, noting, "I can feel myself changing. The light hurts now, my eyes see differently, my bones ache with the transformation. S is further along than I am, his skin is changing, he moves differently. Sometimes I don't recognize him, but he says it doesn't hurt. He says it feels like becoming what we were always meant to be. The final entry, dated October 9, 1905, just days before the brothers disappeared, read simply, S condition worsening, transformation progressing too rapidly. Merritt says there is no reversal. The deeper chambers hold the answer, but time is short. We must go tomorrow. Nesmith carefully resealed the metal box and returned it to its hiding place, planning to come back with proper archaeological equipment and perhaps colleagues who could help analyze the inscriptions. That return never happened. On November 12, 1969, 3 men identifying themselves as representatives of the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection visited Nesmith's office at the university. According to his department secretary, they spoke with him privately for over an hour. When they left, Nesmith appeared shaken. He canceled his classes for the remainder of the week and took a leave of absence. He withdrew all his research materials from the university archive where he had been storing them. Colleagues who spoke with him in the days that followed reported that he seemed paranoid, convinced he was being watched. He spoke vaguely of national security implications and the need to leave certain stones unturned. By December, he had resigned his position and moved to Oregon, where he abandoned academic life entirely to operate a small bookstore. When contacted by former colleagues, he refused to discuss his Appalachian research and eventually stopped responding to letters altogether. One former colleague who visited Nesmith in Oregon in 1972 reported a disturbing conversation. After several drinks, Nesmith allegedly confessed that he had kept some of the samples from the cave laboratory and had them analyzed by a chemist friend. The results had shown the presence of unknown compounds that appeared to have mutagenic properties. More disturbing was Nesmith's claim that after handling the samples, he had begun experiencing unusual symptoms, increased sensitivity to light, enhanced night vision, and inexplicable knowledge of the layout of caves he had never visited. "There's something in those mountains that changes you," he reportedly said, "not just your body, your mind. It gets in deep and rewrites you from the inside out. And the worst part is, part of you wants it to happen." The Whitaker case might have remained buried forever, if not for an unexpected development in 1987. Construction workers excavating for a new highway through McDowell County uncovered a sealed metal container while blasting through limestone near Blackthorn Ridge. Inside were medical specimens preserved in a solution that had long since evaporated. The specimens were sent to the state medical examiner's office in Charleston. The official report described the specimens as tissue samples of indeterminate origin, possibly human, but exhibiting abnormal structural characteristics. Before further testing could be conducted, the specimens were confiscated by federal authorities, who cited concerns about potential biohazard materials. No further information was ever released. One of the construction workers, Joseph Kincaid, later claimed in an interview with a local newspaper that they had found more than just the container. According to Kincaid, the blasting had opened up a narrow fissure leading to a small cave. Inside, they discovered what he described as a sort of camp with the remains of equipment and supplies that appeared to be decades old. More disturbing was Kincaid's claim that they also found human remains, partial skeletal fragments that showed unusual characteristics, including extra-long finger bones and strange ridges on the skull. Before they could document their find or report it to local authorities, federal agents arrived and took control of the site. The workers were sworn to secrecy and threatened with prosecution if they discussed what they had seen. Kincaid's interview was never published, and he reportedly left the area shortly afterward. This incident briefly revived local interest in the legends of Blackthorn Ridge. An article in the Charleston Gazette mentioned the long-forgotten mystery of the Whitaker brothers and questioned the continued secrecy surrounding events from 80 years prior. The journalist who wrote the piece, Carolyn Stern, attempted to follow up with a more extensive investigation, but found herself stonewalled at every turn. County records were unavailable, Potential witnesses suddenly became unreachable. Even geological surveys of the area were classified as restricted. Stern's notes, preserved in the newspaper's archives, document her growing frustration and concern about what she described as obvious interference in her research. She reported being followed by unmarked vehicles and discovering that her home telephone had been tapped. Most disturbing was her account of being approached in a parking garage by a man who never identified himself, but knew details about her investigation that she had never published. The man warned her that pursuing the Whitaker case could have serious consequences for national security, and suggested she focus on less sensitive stories. Despite these warnings, Stern continued her investigation. She made contact with former miners who had worked in the region during the 1950s and 1960s, several of whom reported unusual experiences in the deeper sections of mines near Blackthorn Ridge. They described equipment failures, strange sounds, and occasional glimpses of what they called cave people, pale humanoid figures that moved swiftly in darkness and avoided direct contact. Most of these sightings were dismissed as mining folklore or the effects of oxygen deprivation, but the consistency of the descriptions across different accounts gave Stern pause. More compelling was Stern's discovery of medical records from a clinic in nearby Bradshaw. In 1957, a hunter had been brought in with injuries sustained in a fall while exploring caves near Blackthorn Ridge. While treating his wounds, medical staff noted unusual characteristics. His eyes had no discernible irises, appearing as solid black orbs. His skin had a translucent quality, and his body temperature was significantly below normal. The patient was sedated for treatment, but escaped during the night despite his injuries. A notation in his file indicated that blood samples had been sent to a government laboratory for analysis, but no results were ever returned to the clinic. In a final peculiar twist, property records show that in 1988, the entire Blackthorn Ridge area was purchased by a private research foundation called the Institute for Advanced Geological Studies. The institute had no public presence, no website, no published research, and listed a post office box in Delaware as its only address. The land was immediately fenced off again, with signs warning of unstable ground and potential sinkholes. Local residents reported increased activity in the area, including construction vehicles and what appeared to be drilling equipment. According to satellite imagery Stern obtained, a substantial facility was constructed at the site, a complex of buildings with what appeared to be ventilation systems and security measures disproportionate to any ordinary research station. Power lines were installed, connecting to the main grid but with capacity far beyond typical requirements. Most notably, the complex included what looked like an elevator shaft leading straight down into the ridge. By 1989, the activity had ceased. The fence remained, but no personnel were visible. Satellite images from the early 1990s show what appears to be a small research facility nestled against the ridge, but it's impossible to determine its purpose from aerial photography alone. By 2000, even this structure had been removed, and the area was allowed to return to its natural state. The fence, however, was maintained and periodically replaced with newer, more sophisticated security measures. Stern's investigation came to an abrupt end in early 1988 when she accepted a prestigious job offer from a newspaper in Seattle. Colleagues at the Charleston Gazette expressed surprise at her departure, noting that she had been deeply committed to her work in West Virginia and had never mentioned applying for positions elsewhere. Attempts to contact her at her new workplace were unsuccessful. The Seattle paper had no record of hiring anyone by her name. Her byline never appeared in any publication again. And that is where the trail of the Whitaker brothers ends. In questions without answers, in records erased or altered, in witnesses silenced by time or intimidation. What did they discover in the depths of Blackthorn Ridge? What was Dr. Merritt's true purpose? Why has there been such a concentrated, long-lasting effort to erase their story from history? Some theories suggest they stumbled upon something geologically significant, perhaps unusual mineral deposits with military applications. Others point to the medical aspects of the fragmentary evidence, suggesting they discovered something with biochemical properties that authorities deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. A few fringe researchers have even proposed more extreme possibilities involving ancient structures or artifacts found deep within the Appalachian Mountains, predating known human habitation of North America. The most disturbing theory, however, comes from the few pages of the Whitaker notes that Professor Nesmith photographed before his abrupt departure from academia. They hint at something that was changing them physiologically, something associated with the deeper limestone caves. Samuel's condition and the transformation mentioned in the final entry suggest exposure to something that altered human biology in profound ways. If this interpretation is correct, the question becomes not just what happened to the Whitaker brothers, but what they were becoming. This theory gains credence from scattered reports throughout the decades following the Whitaker incident. In the 1920s, coal miners in adjacent counties reported encountering pale figures in abandoned tunnels who moved with unnatural speed and could see in complete darkness. During the 1940s, a geological survey team in the region went missing for 3 days. When they reappeared, they claimed to have been lost, but observers noted they seemed changed, jumpy, sensitive to light, and unwilling to discuss certain aspects of their experience. In 1956, a caving expedition in the area reported discovering a chamber containing artifacts of unclear origin, tools and containers made from unfamiliar materials, adapted for use by hands slightly larger and with more joints than human hands. Before they could document their find properly, they were ordered to leave the area by individuals identifying themselves as government agents. All their photographs and samples were confiscated. Most compelling is the case of Edward Whitaker, who appeared in McDowell County in 1972, claiming to be a descendant of the missing brothers. He requested access to county records relating to his ancestors and spent several weeks exploring the forests around Blackthorn Ridge. Local residents described him as unusually pale and soft-spoken, with an odd gliding gait. He stayed at a boarding house in Welch, but was rarely seen during daylight hours, claiming to suffer from a medical condition that made him sensitive to sunlight. After approximately a month, he departed without explanation, leaving behind a journal that the boarding house owner later discovered hidden in his room. The journal, which eventually found its way to a local historical society, contained detailed maps of cave systems under Blackthorn Ridge, drawings of unusual rock formations, and cryptic references to the colony and those who completed the change. Most disturbing was a passage that read, "The transformation continues through the generations. We adapt, we evolve. Soon we will be ready to expand beyond the deeper chambers. The upper world has forgotten us, which is as it should be. We observe, we prepare. When the time comes, the reunion will be on our terms." The Historical Society staff member who first cataloged the journal reported that it disappeared from their collection within a week. When she inquired about its whereabouts, she was told no such item had ever been received and that their records must be in error. She was soon after offered a position at another institution in a different state, which she accepted. In 2002, an elderly man checked into a hospital in Seattle with unusual symptoms. His skin was described as abnormally pale and partially translucent. He had extreme sensitivity to light and sound. Most notably, he appeared to have significantly enhanced night vision and could navigate perfectly in darkness. When asked for identification, he provided the name Elijah Whitaker and claimed to be 129 years old. Hospital staff assumed he was confused or suffering from dementia. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered. Before it could be conducted, the man vanished from a locked ward in the middle of the night. Security cameras showed no one entering or leaving, yet he was simply gone. A nurse reported that before his disappearance he had been writing something repeatedly on a pad of paper. When recovered, the pad showed a single phrase written dozens of times. "They're still down there, still waiting. The chamber's beneath." This incident was documented in hospital records but received no media attention. The attending physician filed a report with county health authorities, noting the unusual physical characteristics and unexplained disappearance. Within days, all records of the patient's stay had been removed from hospital systems. When the physician inquired, he was informed that no such patient had ever been admitted. Perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence emerged in 2016, when an urban exploration group illegally entered an abandoned government facility near Blackthorn Ridge, a small concrete structure that appeared to have been some kind of monitoring station. Inside, they found equipment dating from the 1980s, including seismographic devices and air sampling systems. More intriguing was a logbook they discovered in a locked cabinet, containing daily readings and observations spanning nearly a decade. Many entries were routine, but scattered throughout were alarming notes. Movement detected at depth of 1,200 feet. Unusual audio patterns recorded possible communication. Air samples show elevated levels of unknown compound. Matches profile designated WH7. The final entry, dated April 1993, contained just 4 words: "Containment potentially compromised. Evacuating." The exploration group posted photos of their find online. Within hours, the images were removed from every platform where they had appeared. The group members reported being visited by federal agents who confiscated their equipment and warned them against discussing what they had seen. The facility itself was demolished within a week, the site bulldozed and replanted with native vegetation. The truth about the Whitaker brothers of Appalachia remains hidden, buried under layers of official secrecy and the passage of time. Perhaps that is for the best. Some secrets are kept not to protect the powerful, but to shield us all from knowledge we may not be prepared to face. As Thomas Garrison told Margaret Holcomb in their first meeting, some things are better left in the dark. For those inclined to dig deeper, a word of caution. The few researchers who have pursued this case too vigorously have encountered obstacles that go beyond the merely bureaucratic. Strange phone calls, unexplained surveillance, job opportunities that suddenly vanish, and occasionally something worse. In the limestone caves that honeycomb the Appalachian Mountains, darkness has weight and substance. It fills the lungs like cold water, sound behaves strangely, traveling farther than it should or disappearing entirely. And sometimes, in the deepest chambers, where the weight of the mountain presses down and the air tastes of ancient stone, there comes a sound that is not quite human, something between a whisper and a sigh, like the breath of someone who has been waiting a very long time. The records may be erased, the witnesses may be silenced, but in those dark places beneath the mountains, the truth remains. And perhaps, so do the Whitaker brothers of Appalachia, transformed beyond recognition, adapted to an existence in perpetual darkness, watching and waiting as they have been for over a century. The question that haunts those who have glimpsed fragments of this mystery is not whether such things are possible, but what it might mean for our understanding of humanity if they are. Local folklore in McDowell County has incorporated elements of the Whitaker story over the decades, though few connect the tales to actual historical events. Parents warn adventurous individuals to avoid the caves around Blackthorn Ridge, saying that those who venture too deep might never return, or might return changed in ways that can't be undone. Miners still speak of the pale ones who inhabit abandoned tunnels, though most consider such stories to be nothing more than mining superstition. But those who have spent time in the deeper woods around Blackthorn Ridge tell of unusual experiences: compasses that spin without reason, electronic devices that fail, the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Hunters report finding strange footprints, human in general shape, but with elongated toes and unusually deep impressions, as if made by someone heavier or denser than an ordinary person. Most telling are the reports, never published but shared quietly among long-time residents, of sounds that emerge from certain caves on still nights. Not animal sounds, not wind or water, but something that resembles human speech, stretched and distorted, as if the speaker's vocal anatomy had evolved along different lines. Those who have heard these sounds describe them as both familiar and profoundly alien, recognizably language, but no language ever spoken in daylight. As for the government's continued interest in the area, satellite imagery shows periodic activity at the site even today, though no permanent facilities are visible. Local residents report occasional convoys of unmarked vehicles traveling to the ridge, usually at night. Aircraft, both helicopters and drones, conduct regular flights over the area, following patterns consistent with surveillance operations rather than casual observation. The Whitaker brothers disappeared in 1905, but their story, or what little remains of it, after decades of systematic erasure, suggests something both fascinating and terrifying. That beneath the Appalachian Mountains, in limestone chambers carved by ancient waters, there exists the possibility of human transformation into something other. Whether this transformation is evolution or devolution, advancement or regression, remains an open question. Whether it continues to this day, hidden from surface dwellers by layers of rock and secrecy, is perhaps the most disturbing question of all. The limestone mountains of Appalachia have always kept their secrets well, but limestone is porous, it breathes, it shifts, and sometimes what has been buried finds its way back to the surface, changed by its time in darkness, but recognizable still as something that was once human, and might be again. The records may be erased, the witnesses may be silenced, but in those dark places beneath the mountains, the truth remains. And perhaps so do the Whitaker brothers of Appalachia.